So we've been going through, of course, this little journey of Daniel, his friends, Nebuchadnezzar, now Nebuchadnezzar's son, or what might have been his grandson, Belshazzar, and really seeing how their faith, whether they believe in the God of the Bible, whether they don't, how their faith comes to bear and how it's actually worked out within their jobs. Remember, this is an employer and an employee relationship. The king, Daniel works for him, and Daniel's friends work for him. At this point, actually, Daniel's so old, he's probably retired, and he's what you and I might consider a consultant. I guess he's hired as a consultant to the king. So he's coming in on a part-time basis. He telecommutes, works from home, whatever. Still yet, he's working out his faith, his beliefs with this king, and in the context of work. And we've seen various issues that they've had in their jobs, issues of pride, issues of motivation. Why do I go to work? What do I do when I go to work? What's the importance of my job? And here, today, we see something, at the surface it may look like pride, and I know we talked about pride last week, but this is something a lot deeper than that. What we see today here is Belshazzar and Daniel teach us a lesson about significance, about our importance, about what makes you and me important, what makes us significant. Art, do you feel that you're a significant person? And how do you gauge your significance through your work? How do you understand, or what does your job tell you about your significance, and where do you place your ultimate significance? Daniel's going to be working this out. God's going to be teaching a lesson to Belshazzar. So let's jump into this. What does Belshazzar learn about his personal significance? What do you and I pick up about it? And how does it impact your job? And how do you see it through your work? And in order to do it, we're going to look at three things. Oh, my three things: the feast, the fingers, and the forfeit. Now, it's every preacher's vain hope that if we use alliteration, somehow you will remember the message better. And it will probably remain a vain hope, but I'll still try it. Okay, you can't forget the feast, the fingers, and the forfeit. It's three simple things. Let's look at this first, the feast. What does that feast teach us about significance and where we find our significance or our personal importance? Well, here, what is Belshazzar doing? You notice what's interesting here. He's throwing a huge feast. It says it was a great grand feast, probably the biggest feast that this Babylon would have known for years and years. But what's interesting, there's a few unique things about this feast that you can't really pick up on in the text. You kind of have to have some historical knowledge of feast. And I know in a minute I say history, a lot of your eyes like glaze over. Don't worry, we're not going to get into boring history. This is actually, I think it's interesting history here. When a king threw a feast, especially in Babylon, you would never do what Belshazzar did. Belshazzar does something very unique, a few things. One, he brings out his concubines. Do you notice this? It repeats it over and over again. He says the king, his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. Now, if you were a king throwing a party, history says you never brought out your concubines. Why? Because your concubines were your own private source of power. It was a way in which you would know exactly how powerful somebody is. In this time, you might go to a party and say, well, how many concubines do you have? And they would tell you, and then you would know how powerful. You might be the same way of saying, how many houses do you have now? And it's because this is what concubines were. Sadly, they were personal property. Belshazzar carts them out. What is he doing here? He's parading these concubines out here to show his power. It's in essence, Belshazzar is basically saying, look how powerful I am. If you want to know exactly how powerful I am, count them, and you'll know. You'll know how important I am by how many of these I have. He brings them out, and this would have been, you never would have done this in this time. Belshazzar is making an explicit statement of power and significance and importance. But he doesn't stop there. He doesn't just bring out his concubines as personal proof of his power, but he brings out, you notice they said, the goblets. Now, what was special about these goblets? They were the ones, if you remember a few weeks ago, that his father, or his great-grandfather, most likely, Nebuchadnezzar, took from Jerusalem. What's going on here? Belshazzar is basically saying this. If you want to know how important I am, Belshazzar would say, you can look at my concubines, but I'll go even further. Look at these treasures that I have that we took. that we took from this little place called Jerusalem. Look how important I am. Drink from these, not from the regular cups. And he goes even further to praise, they say, the gods of silver and gold and bronze. What's he doing? Belshazzar is praising and taking pleasure, taking importance in man-made things. He's saying, look, if you want to know, I'm a pretty important guy. And if being king isn't important enough for you, look at my concubines. Look at my treasures. Aren't they magnificent? And of course, everybody would have praised him. But then the hand comes and he gets terrified. And you notice he's terrified of what's the writing on the wall, even though he doesn't understand what it means at all. Because he knows something is about to threaten the very things that he finds most value in. He knows that this writing on the wall is about to shake him to his core. He doesn't know exactly how, but he knows what. Here, if you want to know where you find your significance, here's a litmus test you can do. You can find your significance, or the root or the source of your significance, in the thing that, if it is taken away from you, you will begin to feel insignificant. Now let me say that again. You know where you find your ultimate significance. I know we all can say we're children of God, and that's where our significance is. Let's be real. Let's be honest. You know your ultimate significance, and where you find your significance is if in the thing that, or the person that, if they snub you, if they disrespect you, if that's taken away from you, if you lose that promotion, if you don't get that job, you start to feel insignificant. Now let me give a story here to help you understand this. I'm going to tell you one of my many sources of significance. And it comes, most of you know my melonhead story. I'm going to tell you my melonhead story. Oh boy. Okay. I have a few siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. They're all older than I am. One's 9 years older, one's 4 years older, and one's 2 years older. I'm going to show you the difference between feeling insignificant and being offended. And there's a big difference. My older brother, who's 2 years older than me, he had the same teachers I had growing up, roughly. And they all loved him. They all loved him. And so he knew this fact, and he took advantage of it a couple times, and I'll tell you how he took advantage of it. Growing up, let's say that I had a rather large head. I had a rather bulbous head in relation to my body. It seems that everything's kind of caught up. Maybe now my stomach's outweighing my head. But when I was a child, I had a huge head. You could see it from space, I'm quite sure. And my knobby knees poking out from underneath it. Now, I didn't care that I had a huge head. I really didn't. Actually, this story takes place when I was in 6th grade. And when I was in 6th grade, I was having the time of my life. I didn't care that I had a bulbous head or of any such sort. Now, my brother, who had the same teachers, took advantage of the fact that the teachers really liked him. And I remember he did this for a good month or so. I had a homeroom class with Mrs. Stagel. And now, Mrs. Stagel, my brother had her 2 years before me, and she loved him. So he would come in, and this is his morning ritual with his friends. And he would say, "Hi, Mrs. Stagel, how are you doing?" And she would say, "Hi, how are you doing?" Then, when the class was entirely quiet, middle of the morning, all my friends around, he would turn to me and shout, "Melonhead, melonhead, melonhead," to me, in front of all my friends, okay? Now, why do I tell you this stupid story? Because I cried. I quite honestly cried. Now, if my oldest brother or my sister, or even if you said that I had you can tell me I have a large head now, and I might get offended by it. But when my brother did it, I started to feel insignificant. I started to feel devalued. And this was a pattern that went through my entire... I tell you that stupid melonhead story because it's exemplary of the relationship that I had with my brother. Throughout my entire life, probably up until the fact, even up to a few years ago, my brother, for some reason, had an inordinate power. If he called me melonhead, it made me feel insignificant. If you called me melonhead, I might be offended. I would be. Don't call me that, please. I will be offended, but I won't feel insignificant. Do you see the difference? You see the difference between feeling insignificant and feeling merely offended. If you want to know where your significance lies, it's in the place or it's in the person that when they snub you or when you don't get what you want out of that thing, you're not merely just offended. You start to feel insignificant, unimportant. No, I'm not crying at that. I do have a sniffly nose. I'm over the melonhead stuff. Really, I am. Here's something even more interesting about this party that Belshazzar throws. And this is something that doesn't come through in the text. About a week before he throws this party, according to history books, his father had gone out to battle a little ways outside of Babylon, outside of the city, and was defeated by the Medes and the Persians. Now, the Medes and the Persians had come to Babylon, and at this moment, when he's throwing this party, they are outside the city walls, crumbling it down. Let that sink in for a second. Here Belshazzar is throwing this grand party, bringing out the goblets, his concubines, every source of ways to make him feel important and significant, and all the while, his kingdom is crumbling at that exact moment. See, what he's doing is he's trying to mask the fact that in the grand scheme of things, he's not significant. It even says at the end of your text that he's killed in that very night, yet he parties on. What is he doing? He's trying to do the anti-Macbeth. You remember Macbeth after the queen dies, and he's talking about life, and he says, all of life is just sound of fury, a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing. Belshazzar refuses to acknowledge that. He says, no. Even as my walls are being torn down, I'm going to pretend to be important. Even as my kingdom that I've built up is coming to an end, I'm going to tell you that I'm significant. Macbeth said that all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and fret his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound of fury, signifying nothing. Do you have people at your job? I have people that I used to work with that I used to call sound and fury. You may be this at your job. You have these people. There's sound and fury. Whole bunch of noise. What are they doing? They're trying to show how significant they are, and maybe this is you at work. I don't know. They're trying to show how significant they are with sound, with fury. And yet behind, it's just a brief candle out. See, we find our significance in the things that we can tote out, in the things we can show to people, to show exactly how important we are. But the fingers. See, the feast shows you where your false significance is. The fingers begin to show us what's underlying here. What do the fingers say? They say these words, many, tekel, parson. And Daniel, he translates them, so I don't have to do it. Let me put it in modern day language for you, many. Well, and you notice something very interesting. Daniel comes to the king, and the king says, if you can read this, I will give you a purple robe and a gold chain. And at the end of the story, Daniel takes them. Do you notice this? But at the beginning, when he says, here, take these, Daniel says, no. You keep them, give them to somebody else. Is he being cagey? Is he just like being falsely? No, he's not being falsely humble at all. What he's telling the king is this. You want to give me a prize for what I'm going to tell you, but what I'm about to tell you is going to make you feel like the most insignificant, unimportant thing that ever walked the face of the earth. And after I tell you this, you're not going to want to give me that gold and that chain anymore. Because after what I tell you, you're going to know exactly what God thinks of you and exactly where you stand in life. And he says, many, our days are numbered. Basically this, all of us in this room, we will die. Time will forget us. Tekel, your weight, your glory, the thing that you find glory in, the thing you find significance in, your job or your relationships, your marriage, your friendships, whatever it may be, it'll all go away. And God says it weighs nothing to me. And Perez, your kingdom, the kingdom that we build for ourselves to get significance, ultimately says, no, your kingdom will fade. Sound and fury. Many tekel parson. If you have a chance one day, if you have a spouse or if you have a friend and they're starting to feel too important, you just say to them, many, many tekel. No, don't say that. That sounds way too geeky. Don't say that. I thought that sounded good coming out. It did. Don't say that to them. But here's the lesson. The fingers teach us this. We are not significant, none of us. We are not important. Nothing that you or I do will stand the test of time. It will fade away. Daniel says this to the king. But we have someone in Jesus who shows us this in his life. Do you realize that Jesus, being Lord of the universe, being equal with God, deserved the exact opposite of many, many tekel parsons? And yet that's exactly what he got. Jesus' life was eternal. His years were countless, and yet they were cut short for you and for me. Tekel, he had true glory. It says in John, this is the glory of the only one, the glory of God seen in Jesus. He had weight, but he lost it for you and me on the cross. And Perez, his kingdom, Jesus' kingdom was built on infinite joy and service, and yet he lost his kingdom. So that you and I can look at the false kingdoms that we build. We can look at our jobs. Jesus forfeited this. He forfeited it all for you and for me. Now, I'm not what you would call an emotional person. Nope. I've been called, cold, icy, rather heartless. I am not an emotional person. I'll admit that. But I've been challenging myself over the last while to ask myself, if I really believe that what Jesus did on the cross was for me, that his days were cut short, that his life was ended for me, if I believe that, shouldn't that make me emotional? Shouldn't I get emotional about that? I sure got emotional when my brother called me Melonhead. I surely got emotional then and cried. Should I not cry? So because I'm challenging myself, I'm going to challenge you, because misery loves company. I'm going to challenge you to ask yourself this. If you hear the gospel, does it just sound good to you? Or does it start to do something in your heart to shake you? Or what shakes you more, the gospel or the person at work who snubs you? What shakes you more, the gospel or not getting ahead at your job the way that you wanted to? What shakes you more? Let me give an example of this. There's this movies, I don't know why, but there's movies that I find myself always watching. I guess they're on TV a lot. They're not even that good of movies. They're not bad, but they're not great. So when I talk about this movie, don't think that I'm lauding it as some great classic masterpiece of film and cinema. But the movie Contact, the old 1997 movie with Jodie Foster, you probably know this movie. It's on TV quite a bit. Of course, the premise of the movie is that alien life communicates with with humans, and we build a spaceship. It sounds so dumb when I'm saying it this way. But anyway, they build a spaceship, okay? And Jodie Foster is the atheist, so the atheist scientist. She doesn't believe in God. She doesn't believe that God could exist. And she believes that if he did, why would he care about us being so insignificant, so unimportant? And Matthew McConaughey's character, of course, is the religious guy who argues with her throughout the movie about God's existence. Now, fast forward. She gets into the spaceship. She gets whisked away. She has this magical, magical experience with an alien life who talks with her. And then she's whisked back to Earth. Yet, if you remember the movie, nobody believes her. Because she went away so fast, the cameras didn't record her going anywhere. And so nobody believes her. Everybody thinks she's making it all up. She's telling a lie. There's a point at the end of the movie, or towards it, when she's giving her testimony to a congressional hearing. And they want to know, why did we spend all this money? If you are lying about this, if you had no experience, own up to it. Tell us the truth. And there's a part where they're getting pushed back and forth. And James Woods' character pushes her and says, just tell us. And she has this part. I wish I could show the clip, because I'm not going to do it justice, where she gets truly emotional for one of the first times in the movie. And she says this: I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything I know as a human being, everything that I am, tells me that it was real. I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever. A vision of the universe that tells us undeniably how tiny and insignificant and how rare and precious we all are. A vision that tells us that we belong to something that is greater than ourselves, that we are not, that none of us are alone. And she ends by saying, I wish I could share that. I wish that everyone, if even for one moment, could feel that awe and humility and hope. she had an experience with aliens. And she says this, you and I have an experience with the risen Lord. Can you say this? That you wish someone could feel, even for one moment, the awe and the humility and the hope that we are so insignificant and tiny. Yet in God's eyes, through Jesus, he says, don't you see how rare and how precious you really are? If this is the truth, if this tingles your toes, if this makes you emotional, which it should. Emotions are not bad. I know we're kind of calm, cold Christians and are a little scared of emotions. Emotions are fine. Do you have this type of emotion? Do you have a Jodie Foster when you think about the gospel? Does it just intellectually entertain you? Or does it start to go into your heart and move you? If it does, I promise you this, and this is the concluding thought. If it does, the gospel will tell you this: you are not significant. You are not important. Yet you are rare and precious. If you come to me again and again and again, Jesus says. And what you'll do is you'll start to feel significant and stop finding your significance in other things. You'll start to be more impervious to the snubs of other people. You'll start to be able to deal with life a little bit better. It doesn't happen overnight. I gave the melonhead story, but it was a serious issue with me and my family and my brother. That's taken years to work on. But I guarantee you this: if the gospel is emotional to you, and if it does break into your heart, this will start to happen. Many, many tekel pairs. You're not significant, but you are glorious. Please pray with me.